Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Vandenbelt, and I would like to thank you for attending the Thermo Fisher Scientific and Bodhi H2 webinar. To start, we'll have a few quick overview slides on rapid DNA technology to lay the groundwork, and then we'll jump right into the panel discussion to hear from actual agencies with programs currently online. At the end of the panel discussion, we'll have a live Q&A where you can ask questions that may arise. We'll have the panelists available to answer these questions as well as representatives from Thermo and Bodhi. If any questions arise during the introduction slides or during the panel discussion, please also enter these into the live chat as we'll have someone monitoring those and answering in real time. We'll try to get to all the questions, but if we don't get to all, we will follow up with you separately. Thank you all again for your attendance, and without further ado, we'll begin the webinar.
Hello, and welcome to our webinar on recent advancements in law enforcement implementation of rapid DNA. I'm Kristen Naughton, Director of Validations at Bodhi Technology. I'll be providing a brief overview of our validation of the most recent updates to the Rapid Hit ID instrument and associated chemistries from Thermo Fisher Scientific. Then we will hear from a panel of law enforcement agencies and discussion on how their organizations have implemented rapid DNA. This is the Rapid Hit ID instrument, capable of generating DNA profiles from a sample in approximately 90 minutes. The bottom drawer is called the primary cartridge, and it integrates all the components required for capillary electrophoresis. The chemistry-specific sample cartridge is where you would place your forensic swab and then insert it onto the top of the instrument for running. The updated 2.0 version of the Rapid Hit ID contains 3 software components: the user interface of the instrument for running a sample, rapid link on a computer that the user will interact with to see the sample status and export data, and GMapper IDXR, the software a trained DNA analyst can use to manually review the data. A law enforcement user will only interact with the first 2 software components. The expert system flagging informs the user about the quality of the DNA profile obtained after the run. Samples generating green icons have optimal DNA profiles that can be directly uploaded to a database by the user. Yellow icons contain profiles that should be evaluated by a trained DNA analyst, and red icons generally represent a run issue or instrument issue. There are 2 different chemistry options to choose from. The ACE Global Filer Express sample cartridge should be used for reference samples. The new Rapid Intel Plus sample cartridge should be used for evidence collection samples. The updates incorporated into the Rapid Intel Plus cartridge include several profile quality enhancements and alignments to forensic community recommendations and potential future standards for upload to CODIS. The remainder of my talk will summarize results from our internal validation of the Rapid Intel Plus cartridge. The addition of human-specific DNA quantification markers allows a DNA analyst to see both the input of DNA as well as the quality of DNA in that sample. In Bodhi's internal validation, we saw a good correlation of these new markers with the profile results. Additional quality markers were also added, and this will help a DNA analyst determine if the DNA in the sample is degraded or if inhibition of the PCR reaction is occurring. Again, in Bodhi's internal validation, we saw good correlation that these markers were performing as expected based on sample type. The next few graphs represent rapid DNA processing in blue bars and traditional lab processing in purple bars. All of the blood on various substrates that we tested generated good DNA profile results when compared to traditional laboratory processing of the same sample type. Mouth contact items also generated good profile results for most items tested. However, there was a swab from a face mask that did generate better profile results using traditional lab processing. Moving into more touch DNA, traditional lab processing generated more usable profile results than rapid DNA. In this graph, the white bars were added to represent when rapid DNA profile was a mixture, which will generate a yellow icon on the Rapid Hit ID software. Mixtures for touch items is not unexpected and commonly observed in laboratory processing of handled items. However, the mixtures will prevent the sample from being able to automatically upload to a database. To further evaluate low-level touch samples, additional replicates of single fingerprints on glass were tested and continue to show that sending this sample type to a traditional laboratory DNA for processing is still recommended. We also tested 4 different human bone remains, of which 2 generated full profiles. The 2 passing bones were of high quantity yield samples when processed using traditional laboratory techniques, and the 2 that did not work were also challenging to obtain DNA profiles in the traditional DNA processing laboratory. This indicates that rapid DNA processing using the Intel Plus sample cartridge may be a great first pass test for human identification from bone samples versus a time and labor intensive traditional lab process. In closing, I just want to relay that in addition to my team performing internal validations at Bodhi Technology, we also offer validation support for law enforcement agencies. Validation support includes providing a testing plan and samples to run, followed by data analysis and final report of results to maintain as documentation. And our scientists are also able to discuss best practices and recommendations for incorporating into standard operating procedures. I'll hand it over to Bryce now to talk about support provided after validation, and then get into the panel discussion with our law enforcement agency panel.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the H2 webinar. My name is Bryce Vandenbelt, and I am the Bodhi HITS and Rapid Support Account Manager. I will briefly be overviewing the Accredited Laboratory Rapid DNA Support Services and the Bodhi HITS Local DNA Database. So jumping right in, some of Bodhi's comprehensive rapid support services include validation of the rapid instrument, which Kristen has already touched on, post-validation support, and establishment and maintenance of a local DNA database. Bodhi has a range of post-validation support for the rapid instrument in the form of rapid support reachback. Essentially what this is a fail-safe to ensure every aspect of the instrument is functioning properly after the validation process. The first point is going to be performance checks. Bodhi will provide performance checks to assess the functionality of laboratory equipment that affects the accuracy and/or validity of analytical procedures. Performance checks are needed when new primary cartridges are installed, any service call or remote upgrade is completed, and if the instrument is moved to a different location. Quality control testing is the analysis of reagents, controls, and/or standards crucial to assuring the integrity and quality of the procedure. This is going to be performed every time a new lot of sample cartridges is received. Positive and negative controls are ran, and if either fail, they can be sent to reachback to be analyzed. The last point is going to be the modified DNA analysis. Modified rapid DNA analysis requires human interpretation and review by a Bodhi trained analyst and in an accredited laboratory, which Bodhi is. Essentially, this is optimized to utilize when a run from a sample does not obtain a green check mark. The profile is reviewed by the analyst and then returned with either a pass or fail denotion. Rapid Reachback is an on-demand service which is extended from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday. Bodhi's accredited laboratory of trained forensic analysts can provide all of the support needed to ensure compliance with FBI's best practices for using rapid DNA in a law enforcement agency. Circling back to the previous slide, when performance checks, quality control, and modified DNA analysis are needed, a representative from the law enforcement agency will reach out to Bodhi's Rapid Reachback email. This email is monitored by the trained analysts, and a review and response will be completed in roughly 1 to 2 hours. Speaking to the response the analyst gives regarding these 3 aspects, the analyst will either approve the performance check, approve the quality control test, and if either of the performance check or quality control test is a fail, then instructions will be provided for what next steps are needed to be followed. Regarding the modified DNA analysis results, if the analyst reviews the profile and now it becomes a passing sample, the XML file will be returned back to the agency for them to upload to their local database. If the analyst reviews the profile and ultimately rules it to be a failed run, the agency will be notified of this as well and instructed on next steps. So speaking of databasing, Bodie Hits is a local DNA database. This means that any evidence or reference sample you see fit can be entered into this database and immediately searched to all samples contained within it. Our favorite saying is that local criminals commit local crimes, and being able to house profiles and evidence from these crimes in one localized database is a good deterrent for future crimes. Again, the database is in accordance with the FBI's quality assurance standards to ensure leads are generated, that they are legitimate, and can lead to warrants. What I will also mention is that this database is not CODIS, but rather is an effective complement to CODIS. Bodie Hits allows the freedom of entering any type of crime or offender you deem fit. I wanted to mention that depending on your locality, there may be agencies already in the program who have opted to share their data. This means that all evidence and reference profiles entered by these agencies will automatically be searched to any profiles your agency uploads. And lastly, I wanted to mention that one of the greatest benefits of the Thermo Fisher Bodie partnership is that profiles obtained from a rapid hit instrument can be uploaded to the Bodie Hits database directly from your computer and your agency, and the profile takes roughly 1 to 3 minutes to search the entire database. Here is my contact information in case you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me at any time, and I would be happy to schedule a call or meeting to discuss rapid support and/or the Bodie Hits local database in greater detail. Thank you again, and please enjoy the following panel discussion. All right. Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you for joining the Thermo Fisher Scientific and Bodie H2 webinar. My name is Bryce Vandenbelt, and I am the Bodie Hits local DNA database and rapid support account manager at Bodie Technology. Today, you're going to hear from a trio of esteemed panelists who currently utilize Thermo's Rapid Hit ID instrument in conjunction with Bodie's local DNA database to generate investigative leads in real time. Our first panelist is Chief Dave Sassa of the Chester County District Attorney's Office in Pennsylvania. In the summer of 2023, Chief Sassa brought online a Rapid Hit ID instrument along with the Bodie Hits local DNA database program countywide in the county of Chester. Our second panelist is Sergeant Thomas Orzakowski of Newcastle County Police Department in Delaware. Sergeant Orzakowski has been a longtime Rapid and Bodie Hits local database user and is currently in the process of making the transition to Thermo's Rapid Hit ID instrument. Our third panelist is Sergeant Glenn Vandegrift of the Bensalem Township Police Department. Sergeant Vandegrift has been a longtime user of Thermo's Rapid Hit ID instrument and the Bodie Hits program dating back to the mid-2010s and has utilized the instrument and database for a multitude of investigations through the years. Their combined expertise and experience are the reasons they have been asked to speak on behalf of Thermo Fisher Scientific and Bodie Technology regarding how the companies work in conjunction to generate investigative leads for law enforcement purposes. Gentlemen, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So the first question we have is, as we are all aware, the demand for DNA evidence often outpaces the capacity to process samples at your local lab. How has this impacted each of your operations?
Well, I could probably start with that because when we started our local DNA databasing back in 2010, we were looking at pretty significant delays in our state laboratory from the time we sent them DNA samples to the time we got results. And it certainly wasn't any fault of the laboratories themselves. It's more of a funding issue, a staffing issue, things like that that really delayed it. But we were waiting over 12 months in many cases when we sent items to the lab for processing. So when we got an idea that we could start local databasing and get results in 30 days instead of 12 plus months, it certainly was obviously a huge change for us early on. And then with the addition of the rapid instrument and getting results in 90 minutes, we just keep getting better and better. That's been our experience.
That's great to hear. Chief Sassa, Sergeant Orzakowski, did you experience similar things?
Yeah, we did. And just to follow up on what Glenn had said, we're able to process lower level crimes now and send that DNA information to the lab. We're given the ability to train a majority of the police departments in Chester County, as our surrounding partners have too, and are able to process these items very easily through a training program that we had and a very strict policy they followed. We were able to get it done and submit these items and swabs for lower level crimes normally that we wouldn't have to. And this is something that Bucks County, Ben Salem started years ago, and that I saw from afar, and we were able to piggyback on what their foundation, and we're getting crimes processed. We're getting smaller, low-level thefts, burglaries, and stolen cars, and we're able to get that information in a very short period of time. And quite frankly, some of the crimes that the labs nowadays, they probably wouldn't accept it for small items. And we're able to pick and choose what we can and get it done, in some cases using the rapid machine to get it into the system quicker if it meets those requirements.
Yeah, we had pretty much the same story. About 8 years ago, we started our local DNA databasing to address the property crime issues. Before that, we weren't really even processing burglaries for touch DNA, or because we know the labs are overwhelmed with more serious cases. So with the start of our program, I can tell you now we have a clearance rate of burglaries like 48.8%
Wow.
since we started these two programs, and our level of burglaries has significantly decreased.
That's great to hear. Go ahead.
Bryce, I would also like to add something real quick on that.
Sure.
Another big thing for us is, what is the trend now? The trend could be burglaries. The trend could be property crimes, breaking into vehicles. The benefit of the local databasing is that we can send DNA swabs based on whatever trends we have in our local police departments. Where currently in Pennsylvania, you can only send 3 swabs from any one crime to put into CODIS, and then you have to get permission to send more. If we have 15 car break-ins, we can just say, hey, we're going to send 15 swabs of car break-ins, because that's what's important to us in that moment. So the trends are really important to be able to have success in catching these criminals that are doing these crimes in a short amount of time to stop that trend.
And I guess kind of a follow-up question to that would be, how do you select kind of which swabs from those certain crimes to either run through your rapid instrument or send to a laboratory for testing?
I think what we've been doing here is I've done it for many years, and we have another sergeant that's doing it now. We triage all of our samples. So the most important thing is that we tell our officers, we don't want 20 swabs of a scene if you're not really swabbing well, right? I'd rather have 5 really good, well-done swabs than 20 swabs that are kind of like with minimal effort, right? So
Sure.
that's the beginning of it. It's not about volume, it's about quality versus quantity. We'll take quality every time. So
Absolutely.
that's the beginning process of it. And then when we do get 4 or 5 swabs from a scene, it depends on how much money we have to be able to send these swabs. So if I can only send 2 swabs from one particular scene where I have 5 swabs, I will triage it by looking at it and saying, okay, this is the door handle of the interior of a home. This is commonly touched by a lot of people and will probably produce a mixed profile. But I also have a smudge of a handprint on a window on the entry point of the home. That's more important to me than the possible mixed profile. So you look at each individual swab and you make a determination of which one you has the best ability to get a single source from. And that's how we determine on what swabs we're going to send.
Thank you. So the next question I have for you guys is, what are some approaches or strategies you and your agencies have taken to manage the overwhelming demand for DNA evidence effectively? Chief, I'll start with you on this one.
So it's kind of related to the first question. So what we did, and we talked to a lot of people that had this program. We trained a large group of police officers. We trained over 100 in the beginning, and Glenn was one of the trainers, and I think you were present. So we trained them on how the process works, what needs to get done. So we're not wasting swab and evidence time on things that we don't think will be relevant, right? So the biggest fear, at least from my perspective, and it was, you're asking law enforcement officers, patrol detectives to process crime scenes for DNA, and that gives people heightened awareness. Like, this is DNA, we have to make sure it's done right. So I think the training component is done. Having a policy that the officers and detectives understand, and they're able to follow that policy, and they're comfortable with that, and having somebody with experience saying, yeah, this is the way we're going to do it, to make sure you're not contaminating the sample. You're changing your gloves, you're making sure everything is done to the best of your ability. But nowadays people are juries, at least in our county, they expect DNA, right? And Glenn and I have had a lot of conversation about it. If you don't have DNA, they're going to question your case, right? If you don't have any DNA, it's going to, sometimes it could hurt your case. So processing the crime scene or whatever evidence you recover for DNA is so important. And as Glenn said, if you have a rapid instrument, which all three of us do, you're able to develop a profile in 90 minutes, right? You may not know who that person is, you might not identify, but now you have a profile, you have a genetic profile. And if that person, committed a crime and was submitted to a different county, or Bucks County, or Newcastle County, it's in that database, it'll connect it. Or they committed another crime, you'll get a reference to an evidence, or maybe you won't get one. But in the future, if they do it, you'll be able to connect it. So that has been the biggest, I think, for us to manage, and how to make sure that we're doing everything correctly. And once we're doing that, getting the stuff to the lab and making sure the lab has everything that we need, or that they need from us.
Sergeant Orzakowski, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, same thing. We did some additional training,
Yeah.
twofold. We took 2 or 3 patrol officers from each squad. We gave them better investigating skills, like a week-long course on how to write better search warrants, how to do better investigations, how to search all these pawn databases for people that are pawning, and interview and interrogation skills. And then we took it a step further. We also trained 2 to 3 officers on each squad to be evidence specialists. They get additional training in how to swab for DNA, enhanced fingerprint skills. So that's what's helped us pay off on the patrol level.
That's great to hear. Sergeant Vandegrift, anything else to add on that point?
I think they covered most of it.
Okay.
I believe that there is a huge demand for DNA these days, and I've lost cases because you didn't swab something, right? So this is a force multiplier, especially because collecting DNA is actually simpler than lifting fingerprints, right? So we train each one of our officers for 2 hours, and it just turns into a force multiplier. Instead of having to send a detective to every scene, you train everybody to do it. I have officers who are brand new on probation that get just as good a results as detectives that have been here for 20 years from the DNA standpoint. So it's easy to do, it's easy to train people up, and it's easy to bring everybody in on it, because it also pulls our patrol officers into the case a little bit more, that rather than taking the initial report and then doing nothing else. This actually gets them more involved. It gets them excited about doing these types of things and actually collecting evidence at scenes.
Sure. So speaking of that demand, how has the use of Bodie hits and rapid DNA augmented your DNA capacity?
Well, certainly, I guess I can start.
Yeah.
We collect so many more DNA samples now. We collect from every single scene. If somebody steals change from a vehicle overnight, we swab the car to see if we get DNA from it. If somebody cuts a catalytic converter off of a car, we're swabbing the ends of the catalytic converter. We're swabbing tools that were left. So the volume of DNA swabs is just probably 100-fold of what it used to be before we started this program. So with that, you have to look at the back end of evidentiary pieces. Where do you put all this evidence that's being collected? We talked about triaging it, what gets sent to the lab, how do you store it, things like that. So it's augmented our capacity in a way where we've had to think outside of the box to be able to bring all of these things together and be very efficient with the program that we've been doing.
Chief Sergeant, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, same thing. We collect a lot more DNA than we used to. We do your thefts, theft from motor vehicles, theft of motor vehicles, and then your burglaries. We have the ability to send at least 56 samples to Bodie every 2 weeks. And all those hits that you get from that are added. You would have never got them with the state lab because they just can't handle that volume. And nothing against the state lab people. I'm not complaining about it. It's just they have more important things to worry about: your rapes, robberies, and your homicides.
Yeah, just to follow up on that too, Bryce, like, so everybody here knows crime is transient. So these criminals are moving from community to community. They don't know what jurisdiction they're in. And, you know, having this local database, being able to concentrate in southeastern Pennsylvania, it's where the majority of these criminals are that are committing these crimes. So we started our program a year ago in August, right? And some of the first hits we got in the first month were on stolen cars that were recovered in Chester County. We border the state of Delaware, and we got hits from suspects that Newcastle County put in there, right? So they had some juvenile suspects. They collected reference samples, put them in the database. We processed the car for evidence. We sent our evidence in, and we're getting hits to these suspects from Delaware. We border Delaware. So it just shows you how quickly we were able to get up and running, and the process of how it works. So it was an, I don't want to say it's an eye-opening experience, but it was gratifying to see how quickly we were able to link a crime from another state right next to us. And normally we wouldn't be able to do that, right? A juvenile
Yeah.
suspect with DNA, it was huge for us to do that.
So speaking of how you got up and running, how have you integrated rapid DNA technology into your existing investigative processes to maximize its impact on identifying those leads?
So I'll go there. So the biggest hurdle you have when you start these programs is funding, right? We were able to obtain funding in Chester County, a large grant through the county of ARPA funding, where we were able to purchase the DNA rapid machine up front and start the Bodie hits and provide it county-wide at no cost to these departments. So we would absorb the cost for the first 4 years. So any serious crime that we get and we have a good sample, that department has the ability to come to us and get it into the rapid. Same with evidence. We've used the rapid machine with cigarette butts. We've used it for blood collection from a scene and being able to submit and actually get hits, evidence to evidence for prior evidence. So it's a huge component. And in 90 minutes, you're getting, like I said before, you're getting a result, right? And you still have to send a confirmation to the lab, right? But you're getting to further that investigation, in the first hours or days or whenever you collect that evidence. That is such a huge component in criminal investigations, where before you didn't have that, right? You're looking for other ways to do it. And as Sergeant Vandergrift said, it is very simple to do, but you have to make sure it's done right. And once you get police officers trained to do it, and they feel comfortable doing it, and they see the results, the sky's the limit for these results. It really is.
And Sergeant Vandegrift and Sergeant Orzakowski, are you running similar type samples as Chief Sass had listed on your rapid instrument?
Yeah, we are. We're running the blood, the semen, the saliva. We've solved robberies because somebody spit on the sidewalk within 90 minutes, things like that. But I'd also like to emphasize not only the inclusion portion of it, but we've excluded a lot of people using this instrument in 90 minutes. And I think that's a component that sometimes gets a little bit lost, but it is a very important part of our jobs as law enforcement to make sure we do have the correct person and we're prosecuting the right person. So we have excluded many people within 90 minutes to make sure that they aren't under arrest. Or if in fact somebody actually points to the person and says, yes, that was the guy there, I identify him, that isn't always 100%, right? But DNA gets us much closer to that 100% of either including or excluding the person in our investigations.
And I find that fascinating. Is this something that you're doing while they're actually being held for questioning? Are you able to run their DNA in live time there and basically figure out if it was or wasn't them?
Certainly. I mean, it depends on the timing of our judges and if we have arraignments. But if we have somebody under arrest, they've been identified by a witness as being the person. And if they consent, we only use consent or court order here in Bensalem Township to collect reference samples of buccal swabs from folks. Um, and if they consent, usually before they even get to arraignment, we have that 90-minute sample run done before they're arraigned and bail is set to either confirm our results or not. Now, that in and of itself, it may not be a relevant piece of evidence that they don't hit two or do hit two. So it's all within the confines of the complete investigation. But certainly, it's very important at times, and I could cite several cases where we've excluded people, and it not only keeps them from being charged improperly, but it saves investigators loads of time chasing down these leads that may not actually, in fact, be leads.
Sure. All right, let me see. What would you say are some of the most significant advancements in rapid DNA technology that have positively impacted investigations and identifications?
I'll just say you have the ability within 90 minutes.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious to, like Sergeant Glenn was saying, that you have the ability within 90 minutes to include or exclude somebody in that time frame. We had the ability one time, we had a homicide where a male suspect was believed to have stabbed his sister. He didn't have any apparent injuries on him, but he had blood on his shirt. Within 90 minutes, we were able to test that blood, get a female profile. And then the next run, we were able to run the female and the male. And sure enough, it was the female's blood that was on the shirt, all within an hour and a half, or I'm sorry, 3.5 hours.
Yeah, and similarly, we recently had a homicide. We had a suspect. We collected his shoes. There was what appeared to be blood on his shoes. We were able to run the FTA card from the autopsy from the victim to the blood sample on the suspect's shoes and match that within a very short amount of time, establishing our probable cause to arrest for that particular crime, criminal homicide.
Chief, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, sir.
Okay. Can you discuss any collaborative efforts between law enforcement agencies and the lab in implementing rapid DNA programs?
Well, I would say that there's no way we could actually do our rapid DNA program without our laboratory for many different reasons, right? Not the least of which is our reachback support. These instruments are great, but just like the laboratory themselves, every sample doesn't come out perfect every single time. We run at about 80-85% first run success rate in our rapid instrument. And for those other 20-15% of samples, we need an actual forensic scientist to look at the sample to tell us if it's a mixed profile, if it's just some flag that was thrown. And I want to make it clear, we're not scientists at all. All I care about is if I get a green check mark, it means it's a good sample. If I get a yellow check mark in the rapid instrument, it means I have to have a forensic analyst take a look at it. I'm just a dumb cop. I don't purport to be a scientist at all. I just green good, yellow need help, right? And red bad, but that barely ever happens. But yellow, I need help. And we rely on our laboratories for that help often, not only for sample runs, but also for validations of the instrument, also for all kinds of policies and procedures. We try to mirror the laboratory's internal guidelines for the handling of evidence and the running of evidence samples as close as we can and kind of convert it over into a law enforcement police department kind of a situation. Because if we ever get called to the carpet on what we're doing in our police department, as far as proficiency testing and all those other things that come along, we want to have something in place. So if it's challenged, we dot our I's and cross our T's. So without that really great partnership with the laboratory and laboratory personnel, none of this would be possible.
So I'd like to kind of dive into that reach back a little bit more. You'd mentioned a yellow check mark. What does that essentially mean? And when the analyst takes a look at it, what do you receive back, and then what do you do with the profile that comes back?
Well, to be honest, I'll say again, I'm not a scientist. I know
Sure.
enough to make me dangerous. So I'm going to say a couple words here that I probably don't know what they mean, but I've learned over the years kind of like what they mean. So if we are running a sample and we get 24 out of 24 locations that are good within the DNA sample, it gives us a green check. It creates an XML file that we upload into our database. Pretty cop proof. If it's a yellow check mark, it may mean that there's just an imbalance at one of those locations. Two alleles are imbalanced. And that word I know, but I don't really know what it means. But I just know that it creates a yellow check mark, and we need a forensic scientist to take a look at it. Once a forensic scientist takes a look at it, they can either tell us, okay, I know that's an imbalance. I'm going to approve that sample. They send us the full XML file, which was not created if it's not a green check mark. We can't even mess it up. We can't even send anything if it's not a full profile. They will then send us that XML file with the full profile after approved, and then we upload that file. So that's kind of how the reach back process works. It happens very quickly, usually within a half hour to an hour of when we send a run folder from the rapid instrument. Do we get a response from Bodhi Technology, one of their analysts? Do we either approve or disapprove? If they do come back and say, no, that sample has too many issues, could you rerun the sample or rerun a second swab from that reference sample, whatever it is? We take their guidance on what to do next if we don't get that green check mark.
Chief Sassa, Sergeant Orzechowski, anything else to add on that point?
Well, I would say to further that with the lab, having Bodhi hits, connecting all these different police departments. We're connected to Bucks County, Montgomery County, Newcastle County, parts of Lancaster County, Cumberland County, and the biggest impact, I think, and Glenn can speak more about it, is the creation of DIVIC and that lab, and Bodhi hits connecting to that lab. It just expands the database to upwards of 45 to 50,000 both evidence and reference samples. So we're able to get connected to that laboratory in Philadelphia, which is a huge asset to this program. So not only are you getting the collar counties, but you're able to connect to Philadelphia. And we came on after DIVIC was started, and Glenn was there before, and he can tell you how much of an impact that made. I think it's important.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Bryce, I'll just talk briefly about the DIVID database.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, sure. So we share databases with the counties that Chief Sassa spoke about. The one lacking piece that's kind of in between all of our counties is Philadelphia County, and they have thousands and thousands of DNA samples we didn't have access to. So we partnered with the Philadelphia Crime Lab. They came up with a way. The Philadelphia Crime Lab is a CODIS lab. So we had challenges because we couldn't import any of our samples into their CODIS database. So we had a challenge to get through. And the way this was created, and DIVID stands for the Delaware Valley Investigative DNA Database, because everybody likes to give letters to everything, right? So DIVID was created by regionalizing the Bodhi Hits database and the Philadelphia DNA database. We make a copy of the Bodhi Hits database and put it on an outside server. Philadelphia makes a copy of their database every 2 weeks and puts it on the same server, and they're checked through Small Pond to see if there's any matches within that database. So we've gotten around the point of actually having to commingle DNA samples from local DNA databases to ones that could possibly go into CODIS. by creating this separate DIVID database where everything checks against each other. So if we run a sample in the rapid instrument, there's a script that sends a copy of that sample run directly into DIVID, that if there is a hit in the Philadelphia DNA database, it's confirmed by the lab personnel in Philadelphia Crime Lab. And then they send me something, or they will send Chief Sassa something, or Sergeant Orzechowski something saying, we have a hit between these two databases, and then we follow up from there. So DIVID database was a great workaround to share data between them because, as Chief Sassa says, crime is transient. Philadelphia is the core of everything that we deal with on a daily basis, even down to Delaware State. So the core of that is from there. And without that, we were missing a huge piece of it. Now that we have it in there, we now connect databases and we're solving many, many, many more crimes.
And that's great to hear. So I know we discussed a lot about, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Delaware. What kind of recommendations would you guys have for somebody, let's say, that's in, I don't know, Colorado that wants to start up a brand new database? What's your best recommendation? A database? They're bringing on a database and a rapid instrument.
Well, I would say, because I do talk on this a lot, I get a lot of phone calls. Your first contact is with your regional lab. The first thing you need to do is contact your regional lab if you're thinking about a rapid DNA instrument, seeing if they're even going to give you access to their database. That's the big hurdle. Money is a big hurdle, and access to a current existing database is the second hurdle. There are some states that will not allow you access at all to their database, and that's where the Bodie Hits program comes in. If departments within your state go into the Bodie Hits program, everybody can share the same database, and it doesn't cut out your state lab because you're still taking A/B swabs, one for your local database, one for your state database. But what it does is it commingles all this together, and you're able to search from one single database if you don't have access to your state's database or your local state lab's database at all. So the conversations that have to happen first are with your laboratory, and how are you going to effectively use the rapid instrument or the local DNA databasing in your particular jurisdiction.
What I would add too is that obviously talk to your law department for your agency, make sure you're covered, and then also you got to reach out to the prosecutors, make sure they understand what you're doing, that you're doing obviously everything legally, because it's them that ultimately make the choice whether they're going to prosecute your case or not, whether it be a local database or the rapid instrument.
Chief Sassa, anything to add on that?
No, these guys cover. That's why I mentioned it, Glenn, because he started it.
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of want to bring it back to a little bit of success stories because everybody likes to hear about those. Can you guys share a memorable case where rapid DNA provided leads within the first few pivotal hours of an investigation? I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, but just kind of one of your best success stories.
Go ahead, Chief. I think you have one.
Yeah, so we had one recently. Again, we started our program in August of last year. So January of this year, we had a very serious home invasion robbery in a very upscale neighborhood in Chester County, where these suspects broke into a house at gunpoint, tied these people up, threatened them with guns, took them out of their house, went to a business, got cash, and stole their vehicle and fled the area. So we got contacted, later on in the night, early morning, working with the local police department. They recovered a bag that basically had some burglary tools in there in the backyard that they felt was dropped. In that bag, there was a bandage, like an ace bandage, and it had some blood on it. So it was collected by our forensic detectives. We brought it back here. We processed it. We actually did a cutting of that blood, submitted it into the rapid machine, and we got a hit to another evidence sample that was submitted by a neighboring police department the first week that we opened our program, so August of last year. So that evidence sample was some saliva from a water bottle that was in a vehicle that the police chased, and the suspects bailed out. They threw guns out, but they left a bag with a water bottle. So the detective there processed the water bottle, swabbed that water bottle, created it, got a sample, sent it to Bodie Hits. It created a saliva sample. So that water bottle matched to the blood. So now we had the same person doing two crimes 6 months apart in neighboring jurisdictions. And having the ability to get that done that quickly was huge. So the case developed. We were able to get some suspects, and we went into Philadelphia, executed some search warrants, identified some suspects, got search warrants. We were able to get a bugle swab from them, came back, and we entered that bugle swab into our rapid machine, and it hit. We got a hit to the blood and the saliva. That was huge. That was huge for that case. It would have taken a long time to to do that through a laboratory, but having the ability to do that and having the ability to have all that evidence and process it right away and use that rapid instrument was monumental, at least for us in Chester County, because we had just started this program. It just shows you the value of having that, the ability to have that at your fingertips and to collect that evidence. Detectives were trained properly. They know what to use. They knew how to do it. They knew how to use the cuttings to submit it into the rapid instrument. And it was an amazing, there was other evidence we had, but that was the key piece that pushed it over the edge. We ended up arresting 3 suspects, and they're currently pending trial, but that was huge for us.
That's great to hear. Sergeant Orzakowski?
Oh, I talked to you before about the homicide, but I'll mention another case that kind of reaches all the aspects of rapid, local, and assisting other agencies. I know it's only a burglary, but Middletown Police Department in Delaware approached us. They had a burglary a few months prior. They had some blood at the scene, however, and a fingerprint. Fingerprint didn't come back to anybody. They didn't do anything with the blood. They asked if I could run a rapid instrument. We ended up running it, got a full male profile. We downloaded it into our database, and it hit automatically to a subject that was in our database from 2018 from a completely different investigation. No criminal history whatsoever. He did pick up a shoplifting charge. So once we identified him, we were able to get his fingerprints and confirm that his fingerprints were actually in the store. But it was a retail store, so you could use any kind of excuse whatsoever that your fingerprints are there. Hey, I was there shopping. The blood was at the point of entry, the smashed glass, and inside the store. That's kind of difficult to explain. So
sure,
they were able to make an arrest in that case when they had absolutely nobody whatsoever as a suspect, and he wasn't in CODIS. So even if they sent it to state lab, you wouldn't have been able to identify him. It was just our local DNA database that helped solve that case for him.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic to hear.
And Bryce, just to follow up, all that evidence we got and the DNA, we had to send it to the lab to get confirmatory stuff, and we had collected other evidence that we sent to the lab, and they were able to process. So again, having the rapid DNA initially is huge, but it's the lab that makes it work for us, because they're the ones that do the actual work, and they're the ones that produce the report. They're the ones that are going to testify in court as expert and explain everything that we wouldn't, because as Sergeant Vanderbilt said, we're not lab people. We don't claim to be. We're police officers. But having the ability to have that right away and have them be able to testify in conjunction from what we're doing is huge in these cases.
I agree. Same thing with us. Any kind of hits that we get confirmed through Bodie, and sure enough, this case I was talking about was confirmed through Bodie.
Yeah.
A secondary sample was taken from the suspect, and another sample from the crime scene was sent, and sure enough, same thing, hit to the same subject.
Sergeant Vandegrift, anything to add on that one?
Well, yeah, I want to go a little bit different direction, because the homicides and the burglaries are great, but I think just as important is human identification with this rapid instrument. We've done numerous cases, and I'm not going to pick any one, but just to speak briefly about it, We've had bodies that were found in bags with major amounts of decomposition. We've had victims that were burned inside of homes that couldn't be identified with fingerprints because of the burns were so bad, and dental records would take 4 to 6 weeks. We work with our medical examiner's office, our coroner's office, a lot. And what they do is they give us a sample. If there's a suspected family member, we'll run a sample from the decedent, whether it's blood, if there is enough blood left, an FTA card. We've even done bone marrow from a femur bone in the rapid instrument. And then if we have a suspected family member, we'll take the sister's DNA or the mother's DNA or the father's DNA, run that in the rapid instrument as well, and we can immediately compare the two and print out a report for familial relationship between the two. And I don't know how many times we've done identifications that way just to repatriate the remains back to these families so that they know who the victims are in these cases. So we like including people and putting people in prison for things. We like excluding people because we don't want the wrong person in prison. And we also like repatriating remains back to families who have a missing loved one, for whatever reason it is, to make sure that they can get that closure that they need from these types of investigations.
And when you speak about kind of running the family members through the instrument, is there a certain program that allows for that comparison to take place, or kind of how does that process work?
Yes, there's a familial relationship. So you run each sample, the unknown decedent and the known possible family member. And then the software itself actually does the calculations and prints a report out. And most of the times we've done it when we've gotten the so-called hits, it will give you the probability ratio of 99.99% that it is a sibling or it's a parent. So that's usually enough for these identified remains cases. If there is a prosecution that's involved as well, we will send the samples to the laboratory once again to make sure it's confirmed and that a DNA analyst, a forensic analyst, is there to create a report and testify to that fact in court. But there have been a lot of cases where we've been able to create these familiar relationships to make these folks whole again with their loved ones.
That's great to hear. Thank you for sharing that. So it looks like we're just about at time here, so I'll kind of leave off with one final question for you guys. What do you envision for the future of investigations and identifications?
Well,
So
go ahead, Chief.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, the future of investigations and identifications are pretty much what the three of us are doing now. I have to say that we are in the future right now, the three of our departments. I believe that should be utilized, the local DNA databasing, the quick turnaround, the 90-minute DNA, and hopefully Thermo Fisher can get that knocked down from 90 minutes, because I'll take another 5-10 off of that. Anytime they get a chance, forward that to us. But what I would say is that the more and more police departments and investigators that utilize this technology, the more common it's going to become, the more cases we're going to solve, and the more the more criminals we're getting off of the streets quickly to keep them from having more victims. If I can get somebody in my police department and get a sample from them in 90 minutes, know that I have enough to put them in prison for a particular crime, probable cause for that, how many victims have I now saved in the next month, 6 months, 12 months that it would take me to send something to the laboratory and get results back? That person could commit so many more crimes in that time frame. We have him off the street today in 90 minutes, and we're preventing tomorrow's victim. I think that's a really, really important part of this.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Sergeant Vandergrift. I mean, you do prevent a lot of crime by getting this information sooner, charging the suspects with it, because, you know, before it would take 6 months to a year to get all this. And we all know as police officers, your property crime guys, your burglaries and your theft of motor vehicles, they're repeat offenders. They just keep doing it. And the sooner you get them charged and sooner put away, you're actually saving victims from this.
Yeah, I think juries and judges and prosecutors are going to expect this, right? As just like they expect everything else as part of the normal investigative process, because it forensics is the future of law. We're in it, as Sergeant Vandergrift said. This is what we're doing now. You always have your other fingerprints, you know, they're very important, other investigative process, but DNA technology is leading the way, and it's broken down so many different barriers for law enforcement, investigative barriers, meaning we're able now to use a rapid machine and have a local database. And if you would have told me 15 years ago that, you know, I would be able to solve a crime and connect a case with a swab to Ben Salem or Newcastle County, I would look at you like you were crazy, right? So it's unbelievable how it's changed.
Well, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to do this today. Chief Sassa, Sergeant Orzechowski, Sergeant Vandegrift, I really appreciate your time and the absolutely enlightening answers we've had for Rapid DNA and the Bodie Hits local DNA databasing program. So I appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, so we will now go ahead and move on to our live Q&A session. We are fortunate enough to have with us Sergeant Orzechowski and Sergeant Vandegrift from the panel, and they'll be able to touch on some of the questions that have already been asked and that will be asked. So please continue to add those to the chat. So gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate more of your time.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed my quick change there.
So the first question we received is, are you sending the scene samples to Bodie for the DNA processing and then the profiles are searched back against your local database of known profiles? Or are you utilizing Rapid to process the scene samples as well, particularly for touch DNA?
Well, it's a combination of both for us. Just as far as the touch DNA goes, the Rapid instrument is better at doing single source profiles where there's a large amount of DNA involved. So touch samples really aren't the best in the Rapid instrument. So what we do here in Ben Salem is if we have a bunch of samples from a scene and touch samples and maybe blood from the scene or things like that, we may take an A/B swab of blood. We'll also take the A/B swabs of the touch samples, but we know the instrument's capabilities, and we may send the touch sample to the laboratory, and then we'll run the blood sample, the B swab of the blood sample in the Rapid instrument to see if we get any initial hits. And especially if we have a suspect in mind, we'll get a search warrant to collect their DNA and run it. And within the few hours, we know if they in fact do match the blood to the victim or the suspect or whatever. So it is a combination for us. We send 100 samples a month to Bodie to be processed. So they're primarily our touch DNA samples. We also send our confirmatory samples. So if we do in fact get a Rapid DNA hit in the Rapid instrument, we'll send the unused portion of that swab for the 30-day turnaround to the Bodie Hits database to confirm the Rapid sample, and also to give the ability for the forensic analyst to create their report and be available for court to testify about that DNA hit.
Our program is pretty much identical. We don't send, or we don't do any kind of touch DNA in the Rapid instrument. Like Sergeant Vandergrift said, that you have a chance of mixtures which really don't work well. So we try to use single source evidence samples, and then like Sergeant Vandergrift said, that any kind of hits that we get, the primary sample goes to a lab for confirmation.
So we actually did have a question come up that was regarding two swabs, the AB, and you guys did an excellent job of answering that before I even asked it. The next one that we got was, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Bryce. I think one of the questions I did see was the methods we use.
Yep.
And we do put two swabs next to each other and swab the same item at the same time. Unless it's a large volume. If it's a volume of blood or something like that, we may do 2 or 3 individual swabs. We may do A, B, and C swab. To be honest, we might take an A swab for the local DNA databasing. We may take a B swab for the CODIS laboratory of the Pennsylvania State Police here for us. And then we take a C swab for the rapid. So the only thing I'd like to say is the primary swab that we just want every single time is the laboratory swab. The rapid instrument is either the B or the C swab. If we don't have enough what we believe DNA on an item to put in the rapid instrument, then we won't do that. We will send it directly to the laboratory as to not waste that sample so it can't be processed again by the laboratory.
And then kind of following up on that, how do you determine basically when you're swabbing something, how much you get from it? Like if you assume it's like a touch DNA sample, or are there any visible indications when you're doing those?
There really aren't. It's more of just over the years of getting used to what probably has enough DNA for the rapid instrument or not. For the newest edition, the Rapid Intel Plus cartridge, we are just doing validations on that ourselves, and we're very excited with that. We've gotten great results with the older Intel cartridge for our scene samples. The Intel Plus cartridge that just came out is doing a lot less amounts of DNA and giving us better profiles on those types of samples. So we're excited to get to that. So it really is just triaging in the moment what we believe is best to send to the lab or run in the rapid instrument.
So from my experience, I can tell you that obviously a lab doesn't need much DNA on the swab to get a profile. The rapid instruments do need a little bit more. I can tell you about, we used to have the Andy instrument. We had that for 7 years. For something like blood, it took about the size of a grain of rice on a swab to get a good profile. We just finished our validation process. I'm just waiting for the okay to proceed with the new rapid hit ID that we switched over to. And I'm seeing great results from the test that we did with that also.
All right, so the next question we have for you guys is, how many matches have you obtained compared to the amount of profiles you've obtained using rapid DNA?
I don't know if I've ever looked at those statistics. What I will say is that we utilize the rapid DNA instrument a couple different ways, not only for scene samples, but we also run reference samples in the instrument as well. So if we arrest 500 people in a month and we send some of those samples, those reference samples, to the laboratory to put in the database, we will supplement with other reference samples in the rapid instrument. The only difference between the two is if we get a DNA hit to an evidentiary sample from when Bodie processes it and put it in the database, it's a hit, we get a full report, we move on from there. But if we end up getting a hit to a rapid reference sample, we then send the unused portion to Bodie to do the confirmatory sample next. So the workflow really all depends on it. And to calculate what those numbers are per sample for us, it isn't kind of an easy calculation since we do mix in so many reference samples in there. But I would say that probably over half of the scene samples that we put in produce a usable profile.
So I'll say that we've been doing a local DNA database for about 8 years, rapid DNA for about 7 years. We have over 3,500 DNA hits within those 8 years. 650 are as a result of rapid. So I keep track more of how many cases it assisted, because let's say John Smith hits to one case, and then 3 months later, you send 2 more samples. It's John Smith again. that's another 3 DNA hits, but it's only one case. But I can tell you in 8 years, 1,280 cases have been solved through the local DNA databasing and Rapid.
Thank you for those stats. The last question I have for you, gentlemen, is what types of cases do exclusionary samples help the most using Rapid?
So I can say that.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sarge.
So I know we've used it before in a homicide where we had a domestic where it was a male and female. They both armed themselves with knives. Unfortunately, the female died as a result, but we know she stabbed him also. But we were able to like triage and run those samples in Rapid to see whether it was her blood at a particular location or his. And the blood that we ran showed that she was actually trying to escape out the front door. It was her blood at the front door before he dragged her back into where she ultimately passed away.
Yep. And I'm sorry, Bryce, I don't want to jump on you there, but I see Amanda just had a great question that I wanted to answer real quick before we finish up. As far as her question was, have you had any challenges in court for the cases with rapid testing? So we only use a rapid DNA hit for probable cause and for our preliminary hearing to establish a prima facie case here in Pennsylvania. We've never introduced the rapid DNA hit at trial because we send those confirmatory samples to the laboratory, and then the laboratory personnel are the ones who testify about the DNA hit in the lab. The rapid isn't mentioned. So the rapid is being used as more of a pointer to narrow our focus, narrow our investigation and probable cause to arrest or get more search warrants. So we've never had a challenge because, in fact, we never introduced it at trial in that way. We always have the results from Bodie and the forensic analyst testifying. We never talk about the rapid pointer hit.
So we're the same way. We use it as a lead, as the sergeant said, and always the primary sample sent to a lab to confirm it, and it'll be the lab report that we would use.
It looks like we just had another question come in. When officers are obtaining reference samples, not related to a case, but to build local small pond, how are they storing them without using a case number?
So we always have to have a case number. It has to be documented that you actually collected somebody's DNA and you verified their identity. So what we teach our officers is anytime they do a search warrant for somebody's DNA, they're at least getting 2 samples. One will be for our local database and the other one could be for the state lab or Rapid, whatever you need. But we have what's called CPCs. They're like, you make contact with somebody, you're documenting it. And obviously we won't encourage somebody just to, when they stop somebody, to ask for their DNA. All our samples are from warrants or from consent that we need their DNA.
And we're pretty much the same. The only thing I would say is that anytime our police officers have contact with somebody and they do collect a reference sample, there is a report generated. Therefore, there's an incident number. So every contact with somebody is documented here at our police department, whether it's a pedestrian stop, a traffic stop, or whatever. So there's always going to be an incident report associated with that collection so we can track it back to see how and when it was collected.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, I think that is all of the questions that we've received. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and your questions. I hope you enjoyed the panel discussion and took away something useful from the information provided. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. And thank you all again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.